Yep.
Okay. All right, here we go. So Jody very convincingly told us that we're on page 295, almost done with tests, but not quite.
Well, 295 is
Right on the English side. Okay.
All right, here we go.
No, never.
Perhaps you should consider. Good morning, Will. Nice to have you. How you doing? You canceled the plans that you didn't have? Nice. Okay.
We had those sirens over Shabbos for a change.
All right. All right. I did not prepare as much as I usually do, so some of this will hopefully be new material for all of us. All right. Let's start by recapping what we did last week. So last week we talked about the other parshias, the other paragraphs that are said together with Shema and Baruch Hashem. So Shema and Baruch Hashem we covered. Then we talked about the next two paragraphs, which are V'ahavta, and we didn't really talk about V'haya, and then we talked about Vayemer. So V'ahavta, the first, which is the first of the three additional paragraphs, is talking about first loving Hashem. And the idea of that needs to be an all-pervasive mindset. That everything we do, we need to be thinking about that. We need to be guided in our lives by the concept of Ahavas Hashem, of loving Hashem. And I didn't mention this, but I actually came across a Chafetz Chaim who writes, he says that we know there is a mitzvah to wear tefillin for men, and for a person to say Shema, which includes the mitzvah of wearing tefillin, when they're supposed to be wearing tefillin but they're not wearing tefillin, is a bad thing. Because you're reading the parsha that says you should put on tefillin, and there you are, not wearing your tefillin. So that's called Meid Eidah Sheker Ba'atzmai. It's like you're testifying falsely against yourself. Because you're saying I should be wearing tefillin and you're not wearing tefillin. Obviously, if it's Shabbos, you're not supposed to be wearing tefillin, or it's at night, you're not supposed to be wearing tefillin, etc. But if you are saying that when you're not and you're not doing it, then that is actually a bad thing to do. You're really not allowed to. So he says the same thing kind of should apply to when we say V'ahavta, where we say that you should love Hashem, your God. He says, well, what if you say that and you're not doing it? So that's kind of like along the same lines of saying you should be wearing tefillin and you're not wearing them. So he recommends that we should, right before we say V'ahavta, we should stop for a second and think, I love Hashem. And then you can say it. Because if we just say it without thinking it and we're not really in that mindset of loving Hashem, he said that's kind of detrimental. So you don't want to be doing that. So I thought that was a very interesting outlook on this first paragraph, the added paragraph of Shema. Okay? Okay, so, okay, and then we talked about how the second paragraph is just about the mitzvahs, which he doesn't really get into, and we said that's probably because it's very self-explanatory, that we understand that our acceptance of Hashem as king has to include doing his bidding. So that's what the second paragraph is all about. And then he gets into the third paragraph, which is that of Vayemer, which has the mitzvah of tzitzis as well as the remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. This week's parsha, by the way, in case anyone was wondering. When he got into this, he didn't really talk about tzitzis very much, but he did talk about the primary mitzvah, it seems, of this third paragraph, and that is understanding the importance of the Exodus from Egypt. So he basically said that the world, after the sin of Adam, was lowered to a point that it could not rise up past a certain threshold. There was a certain maximum that we couldn't rise above. And it was only once we were taken out of Egypt and we became the nation of Klal Yisrael as the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it was at that time that we had that limit removed. We were purified to a degree that we would never return to that state that we were in. And the opportunity that presented was one of breaking that ceiling. And forevermore, the Klal Yisrael would have the ability to rise up higher than the rest of the world and higher than all of the world was able to, Klal Yisrael included, up until that time. So this concept of attaining a level of greatness that really was unattainable happened through Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that spills over to the world. And all of the crowns that we earn, that we receive, all of the glory that Klal Yisrael is made of, all comes through this acceptance of Hashem, and that was all made possible at Yetzias Mitzrayim. So he's saying that it's like the purification process of gold, that it needs to be heated. It needs to go through a very difficult purification process, which was our slavery in Egypt. And once that was completed and we left, we were on a level of purity that broke through that original ceiling that was imposed upon the world with the sin in the Garden of Eden. So all of the goodness that Klal Yisrael is able to achieve and receive was all only made possible once we experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that part of that is the accepting of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So all of this is really what we're supposed to be incorporating into our Shema experience. Our Shema experience of accepting Hashem as our King and recognizing His sovereignty and allowing that to be pervasive throughout our lives, part of that has to be the understanding that our greatness came through Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's not something we can kind of leave in the background, leave to history. It's something that needs to be present, that we have to realize we have so much potential because of the purification that we experience through Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yes?
I'm trying to still absorb this from last week. Is it the greatness that we got, or the opportunity by having more free will, that we have the opportunity for greatness?
What do you mean by more free will?
So what I understood that you said last week was that there was a big adjustment made on the amount of free will that we had, that everything after Yetzias Mitzrayim was sort of 50-50, in that we had everything was equal, negative and positive were equal, and before then, I guess, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we have that equal possibility, opportunity, how is that great? Can you describe that sort of journey to greatness?
Okay. So Leanne is asking what exactly happened at that time that made this significant change. So essentially what happened was, Paska zu hamasa shel nachash, that when Adam and Chava sinned in the Garden of Eden, there was an incorporation of evil into mankind that did not previously exist. And that's what we call the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara became an internal part of us. Not only that, but we became primarily physical beings instead of being primarily spiritual beings. And as Ramchal explained way back in the beginning, the original setup was that choices were 50-50, and then after the sin they kind of became skewed and it was no longer 50-50, and the physical side became much more prominent. once we left Egypt and we went to Har Sinai and we accepted the Torah, at that point, the Gemara tells us, Paska Zo Masan Shel Nachash. That influence that the Nachash had incorporated into us ceased. So that ended. So in a certain way, we went back to what it was before the sin. Now, not completely, because we certainly weren't on the level of Adam. We remain primarily physical beings. Nevertheless, the opportunities that the Yetzer Hara had became limited, because we were now kind of on equal footing between the good and evil inclinations within us. So once we were back on that level, not only do we have much more opportunity for growth, and not only are we protected from falling back down to be as low as we were, but we are also worthy recipients of Hashem's glory. So it all comes together. It's not one or the other. It's all connected. The fact that we were raised up to a higher level than we were, so that came with the opportunity and the greatness and all of that. It all came together. Okay, yes?
So, I know that was hundreds of years, couple hundred years that we went through that. And the Holocaust, of course, wasn't as long, but it was something that was also very
Yes?
horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So is that situation attributed to anything that we needed to fix ourselves? It seems like that in our history, that seems like not equal, but really a harsh situation.
Mm-hmm. So you want to know what happened with the Holocaust? What was that all about as far as our national mission?
Did it have any kind of, was there a reason that we know about, like that we can look at what happened in Egypt and, correlate it, connect it? Is there anything like
is there any kind of connection between the Holocaust and Egyptian slavery?
or the rectification of something?
Or
regarding
what did it
Jewish
accomplish
people?
after it was over?
Yeah.
I don't know of anything. I don't know. There have been a couple of different, not explanations, but things to be learned from the experience of the Holocaust, and they're certainly all true. But it's interesting that we don't really find that we had done something so terrible that would have caused the Egyptian slavery. In other words, we don't see that, like we served the golden calf, so we ended up with Egyptian slavery. We didn't have that, right? It was, prior to the slavery, it was pretty much Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, their children, and very righteous people. We don't find that there was anything really harsh that caused the slavery. Now, granted, there were certain things that were pointed out that perhaps kept us from being released from that slavery. Moshe Rabbeinu mentioned that there was Lashon Hara amongst Klal Yisrael, and we had served idolatry, we find. So there were certainly levels that we fell during the slavery, but we don't find anything glaring that was the cause of it. It was pretty simply a purification process, right? Which doesn't need to necessarily be because you've done something wrong. It's just because the world had sunk to a certain level, and in order to rise above that level, there has to be a purification. That's just how it's like purifying gold, right? That's what he says. So, obviously, the Holocaust had all sorts of effects that it needed to have, and the reasons it happened are reasons that we're not aware of. Again, even though great sages they pointed to certain things that said, these things are things that we need to learn from. We have to realize these were problems before the Holocaust, and they may have been part of the cause, but no one that I know of ever said this is why it happened. No one ever pointed a finger as to say this is why it happened or this is the result. But I would assume that to a large degree there was a purification that went on at that time, and that the people who came out of it, who survived, were going to be on a different level than those prior. Now, better, worse, different, it certainly prepared us for a life in America, which was vastly different than life in Europe. But it's certainly not my place to say, and I haven't heard of anyone who said that this was done for this reason with this particular goal in mind. So,
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi Avigdor Miller's book, which I'm sure is considered very controversial, was written some years ago, where he seems to have blamed the Holocaust on things that occurred, from the Enlightenment and the way that so many Jews left the observant path. I don't know if that's accepted theory, but I'm just saying that I think that's one place where it was more directly stated in that particular opinion.
Yeah, there are a number of things that are pointed to, but again, I don't think anybody had the confidence to say that this was the reason for the Holocaust. Yes, Rabbi Victor Miller definitely mentioned the Enlightenment being a problem. The Meshech Chachma mentioned that people losing sight of our true home in Eretz Yisrael, and instead of focusing at Berlin or wherever our local big city was the main place to be. There were a number of things that were pointed to. The intermarriage rates. There were a lot of things that were pointed to, but I don't think any of them were.
Warned them where that was going to.
Yeah. Again, but I don't think anybody ever said this is the reason. So, but again, that's not taking away from the things that were pointed out.
Can I add something?
Please.
So the Nasiba Shalom actually said, I only recently learned this, that he said that just like in Mitzrayim, where there was those last few years where the Gullus intensified to help speed things up, he said it released spiritual energy that allowed ETS Mitzrayim to happen sooner. He put forth that may have been part of the reason for the Holocaust as well. And I liked it because it wasn't a, counter-gun quality, so it was just that this needs to happen faster. And he said that the energy it released actually fueled the Tshuva movement, interestingly enough.
Yeah, certainly. There's no doubt about it. There's been a lot of positive, but none of those positives are justifications for what had happened. It's not like anyone saying that in order to get people to become Balei Tshuva, we're going to have a Holocaust, right? That wasn't the plan. That's not what anybody's saying. The idea is just that there's a lot of movement amongst Klal Yisrael, and that has happened since the Holocaust, and we can certainly look to those things and say, hey, there was some positive that came from this. Okay. All right. Good? Moving on? Okay. Okay, so... Okay, so yeah, we're up to the last paragraph right before Yud, which starts with Vihine. Chaim. Zeh tikun shenitaknu la'olam k'mo shezacharnu. This rectification that took place with the exodus from Egypt, the accepting of the Torah, that was a permanent change that took place. K'mo shezacharnu, as we mentioned earlier. And all of the goodness that came to us and that will come to us, it's all connected to that. Because as we've said, the goodness that comes down to the world primarily is connected to the actions of men. And the level that we were able to attain at that time raised us to a degree that we were able to receive all the goodness that we have received and the goodness that we will receive. Therefore, we are commanded to remember this constantly, and to mention it verbally. Because by doing this, it will strengthen this rectification within us. And the light of Hashem will be intensified within us. Umasmid banu hata'elas hanimshach min hatikanahu, and it will also it will create a constant state of rectification through our remembering and verbally reminding ourselves of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So what he's saying is that this concept is so beneficial and so important that Hashem told us you got to get through this at least twice a day. This is something that's got to be on your mind. It's something you have to verbalize daily or twice daily, because it is so central to our growth and to we'll stick with our growth for now. We're going to talk more it goes further than that, which will be next. But at least for now, we're talking about our own growth, and it's so critical and so crucial that it's something that should not only be remembered daily, but even mentioned daily in order to incorporate that within us. Now, this is a very telling understanding of this, because many times we know things, and yet we do things that are contrary to what we know, right? Sometimes somebody might know that drinking is bad for them, but they're going to keep drinking. Somebody might know that eating this food isn't healthy, and they're going to eat it anyway, right? There are a lot of things that we do even though we know that it's not for our benefit, ultimately. And what he's telling us here is that the Torah is teaching us that by verbalizing this daily, even if it's something you know, but by verbalizing it daily, or maybe twice a day, that will help. It will help intensify the experience. It will help make that knowledge of yours something more than just a fleeting knowledge that's somewhere in the back of your head, but it's something that's at the forefront and it's powerful, and it will then perhaps be able to even be stronger than the particular urges that you have at any given moment. So it's important to recognize the value of verbalizing things. So as much as any marriage counselor will tell you, it's very important to verbalize your appreciation and your love for your spouse. As much as you think, well, they know, that doesn't help, right? Knowledge is not enough. You have to verbalize it. Verbalizing these things helps not only for the people who are verbalizing it too, but for ourselves to concretize these matters and to strengthen them and to intensify the light, as Ramchal puts it. So these are important things to do in general, but particularly when it comes to the Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is why we have this mitzvah of mentioning it twice a day. Okay, good? All right, moving on. Yud, v'ulam. Oid tikun echad nichlal. There is another rectification that's included. Beklal kriyas parashas elu, within the reading of these paragraphs that we read. V'hu, and this is l'saken ha'adam, to rectify man. Kol pratei b'chinais, of all the different aspects of man, ba'ar yichudei yisbarach, in the light of Hashem. V'chein, and also l'sakin bai kol pratei habriya, to rectify all the details of creation. V'zeh, so what this means, k'hinei klal b'chinais shel ha'adam hein ramach. The elements that make up a person are 248. Okay, he's not saying what they are, and I haven't seen anyone who lists what these 248 aspects of man are, but there are 248 elements that make up a human being. And this is what our sages mean when they talk about the 248 limbs of a person. It's not referring to physical limbs, but it's referring to the general makeup of a human being. That is in 248 parts. Those are the number of elements in mankind. V'ulam chalke habriya gamkein, the portions that make up the world, all of creation, all of the universe, lefi kananiyoy sehem hemramach, based on their different I don't know, what word do they use here for that? Parts, pieces, what do they use? Counterparts, mechanisms is what they use in here. All right, whatever. But basically the universe is also made up, also of 248 elements. Okay? And those are counterparts to the 248 aspects of man. Ve'elu, and both of these groups, tzarich sheyisuknu ba'ar yichudai isbarach, they need to be rectified with the light of Hashem. So there are 248 aspects of man, there are 248 aspects of the universe, and all of those need to experience and be infused with Hashem's light in order for them to achieve the rectification from that sin of Adam Arisha. And this is accomplished through the 248 words that make up Shema. So the 248 words of Shema are able to rectify the 248 aspects of mankind and of the universe, all through the words that we say. Now that's extremely powerful, and we're talking about some, cosmic powers that are being discussed over here, but we're talking about the idea of Shema and everything we've learned about Shema, everything we've discussed about Shema, all of what's entailed and incorporated and included in what Shema is, that itself is what rectifies the world. So when we are able to say it and think and accept upon ourselves all of the things that we've been discussing, we're not only fixing ourselves, we're fixing the world. We're fixing the universe. The universe is broken. We ourselves are broken. And Shema is what's able to put that back together. Shema is the antidote. It is what is going to, or it has the ability to, I should say, fix and correct and rectify all of the problems. So this is extremely significant. So when we approach Shema, we have to recognize every single word needs to be said. Every word needs to be said properly. And of all of davening, Shema is actually the only part that every single letter needs to be said properly in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And this is why. Because Shema is so critical, and every word of Shema connects to a different part of yourself and a different part of the universe. So if you miss a word, something's going to remain broken. And if we can view everything as a gear system, you know what happens when one tooth of a gear is broken off, right? The whole thing doesn't work. The whole thing is broken, right? So we have to realize that Shema is so critical because it's so powerful, and we have to make sure that we say each and every word. And it is for this reason that if you're not saying Shema with a minyan, but you're saying Shema without a minyan, and you're not going to therefore hear the chazan repeat the words Hashem Elokechem Emes at the end of Shema, you need to add 3 words. Because there's only 245 words in Shema. In order to get to 248, there has to be 3 more words. Where do those 3 words come from? Well, if you're with a minyan, when the chazan says Hashem Elokechem Emes the second time, you're getting it that way. If not, then you have to add 3 words at the beginning. And if you'll see in the Siddur, it says the words Kel Melech Ne'eman. Those are to be the 3 extra words to add to Shema to make sure we get the full effect of 248. But that is the idea. Okay, we're good? We got this? All right. Okay. Okay, just to point out, Ramchal writes that 248, the letters that represent that are Ramach. Reish Mem Ches. Reish is 200, Mem is 40, and Ches is 8. Now, those letters also spell the word Romach. Romach is a spear. So the mitzvahs, there are 248 positive mitzvahs also connected to all this, which interestingly enough, the Ramchal is not mentioning over here because he's just focusing on Shema. So he's not mentioning the fact that there are also 248 positive mitzvahs. But those are like a spear, Ramchal writes in other places, that are used to defend, to attack against the evil that the world has sustained. Additionally, yes, Avram as well got to that level of 248. Yep. When his name was changed. So Avram's name was originally Avram, and which was 243. And then when he completed his growth, so Hashem changed his name to Avraham by adding the other 5, making him complete at 248, which was the numerical value of Avraham. Hold on, what else did I want to say over here? Oh, yeah, one other thing. That is that the 248 aspects of a person do not include the brain and the heart. Okay, so those are 2 very important parts, but those are not part of the 248. Those are separate, and Ramchal will discuss those later, so just keep that in mind. Okay, moving on. V'hine, Chaim. Chachamenu zal chibru le'inyan hazeh habracha shel Kriyas Shema. Our sages connected, attached to this whole discussion that we've been having, the brachos of Shema. So before and after we say Shema, both during Shacharis and during Ma'ariv, we have brachos There are brachas before Shema, there are brachas after Shema, or a bracha after Shema during the day. So we have brachos that are connected to, they're called the Birchos Kriyas Shema, they're the brachos of Shema. So Ramchal is now going to explain what those are all about and how they are connected to Shema itself. So he says, "V'zeh kihine b'chol mischadesh, b'chol yom mischadesh, kol hametzias kulay milefanav yisbarach." Every single day, there is a renewal of all of creation, all of existence, from Hashem, daily. And this happens in two aspects. Achas, one is the upkeep and the continuity of the world. Because the shefa that comes down to allow everything to continue to exist is sent down to sustain and to do the upkeep for the existence of everything in the world. That's aspect number one. Hasheni, it's in the second, because every day of the 6,000 years, every single one of these days has been decreed by Hashem with particular light and shefa that accompanies that day, as well as realities and situations. All of these things have been designed because these are necessary for the world, so that the world can complete its mission, the intention of creation, and reach perfection. So what comes from all this is, every day is a new mission, it's a new job, it's a new aspect of creation. And in this new aspect, called today, all of the world has to be restarted. All of the world has to be assigned for today's mission. And on this, the pasuk says, that Hashem renews in His goodness every day the works of creation. So, two aspects going on over here, and this happens daily. Number one, the world, as we've mentioned many times, does not exist on its own. It's not like when we make something that it just stays as is until it's acted upon by another force. Everything that exists is only because Hashem is continuing to infuse it with existence. Now, every day that process needs to be redone, and the parable that Rav Chaim Friedlander gives to this is like a person eating a meal. When you eat a meal, you're re-energized. You're able to continue on. You would continue for a while without the meal, but it's going to be going downhill instead of uphill. And eventually, it's going to cease to function entirely without a meal, right? So that's kind of how the world works. The world would continue to an extent without Hashem re-infusing shefa every day. But it's not gonna last. It's gonna start decaying. It's gonna start going down fast. So every day Hashem reinfuses it with a new burst of shefa, and the light, as he says, and that is what allows the world to have another successful day. Okay, that's aspect number one. Aspect number two is that every day of existence, and he's specifically focusing on our current existence, the 6,000 years, every single one of those has a mission, has a purpose. It's here for a reason, it has something that needs to be accomplished, or probably many things that need to be accomplished on this day, and the world needs to adjust to make that work. So if, for example, there has to be an earthquake on a particular day, so there has to be a certain change that happens on that day to allow that to occur, to make that occur. It doesn't just happen because things are stagnant. These are changes. So in order for those things to take place, Hashem infuses every day with a new mission and says, okay, this is what we're doing today. Now, these were all obviously set up before it all started. But today's mission comes with today's circumstances, which allow for today's mission to be accomplished. So every single day has that. And that's true, I don't think just on a global level, but on a personal level, I'm sure it's true as well. That I have certain things and you have certain things that need to happen to you, about you, around you, with you, without you, whatever, today. So your world has to be infused with all those parts and pieces to make today happen in all of its aspects. So that works not only, again, on a global level, but on a personal level as well. And this is what keeps the world in not just functioning, but moving towards this ultimate goal of perfection. Every day has a part in that process of reaching perfection, that 6,000-year process. Every day has something in it that is getting in that place. And it's not just because it's a continuation from yesterday. Every day is a new something. And that is renewed every day. And that's what we mean when we say, in the Derech Hashem, we say, Mechadash b'tuva b'chol yoyim ma'aseh b'reishis. That Hashem renews every day in His goodness the works of creation. Because what was yesterday isn't going to work for today necessarily. Today has a new job and therefore needs new circumstances. It needs a new reality. And Hashem gives it every day. So these are the two aspects of the daily infusion of life that the world receives. And this is kind of the focus of the Berchos Kriyas Shema, as we will continue to explain. Okay? Okay. All right. So then we will stop here, and we will continue. We'll go through a little bit of how the brachos connect to this message and how they show it. Okay. Very good. All righty.